Today's special menu for YouTube restaurant is techniques. We're going to cover one shloka. Well, it's not even really a shloka. We're going to cover one statement from Phaladipika, chapter 3. I think that's the 17th one. Yeah, 17th. That has, I would say, 2 or 3 techniques in it. And there are techniques for using Vargas, because this chapter is about Vargas, Subdivisions of Science. And especially their techniques for using their techniques that apply to the Treka, which is the thirds of the science, and or the bounds, or Trimsha or Bhamsa, which is the unequal fifths. Ready? Let us begin. Let us begin. So, here's a summary of what we've learned so far from Phaladipika, which, if you feel like you didn't learn it, you can just avail yourself of all the recordings of all of the streams that are available on my lovely YouTube channel. So you could go back, you could go to my YouTube channel page and look at the playlists. Maybe you might be the easiest way to find it, or just look through the old live streams. Because in chapter 1 of Phaladipika, he defined all the signs and what the signs represent. He defined all the houses and what all the houses represent. Then in chapter 2, he defined the planets and what they represent. Then when we get to chapter 3, which is our current chapter, he's now talking about subdivisions of science. And he begins by explaining mathematically, or just basically, what are they? Where are they? What are the divisions? Then he moves on to give examples of ways in that you use these divisions. He explained the main technique first, which is just the fact that the multiple divisions of a sign allow you to zero in on dignity, or see dignity as a multi-level thing instead of just a basic planet in a sign has a certain dignity. Now you can see that the degree that the planet occupies in a sign modifies the basic dignity that the planet has by exposing the planet to different dignities and different degrees and different subdivisions. So, for example, if Jupiter is in Cancer at 2 degrees of Cancer, it's also in the Cancer Navamsha. So it would be exalted in 2 divisions. So it would be very exalted. But if Jupiter is at 4 degrees of Cancer, then it's going to be in the second Navamsha, second subdivision. So it would be in the Leo subdivision of Cancer. So it wouldn't quite have that same amount of exaltation. So that was the first technique that he gave. Then he mentioned something which is like, all right, if Jupiter's in 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 1 degree Cancer, then it's going to be in the Cancer Navamsha. Not only is that 2 exalted divisions, but it's 2 same divisions. So he also said that regardless of the dignity, when the divisions are the same as the base sign, then that's good. And then he talked about assessing the multiple dignities by tallying them. So, for example, how many times out of 10 divisions, how many times is this planet in a good one, in a good dignity? If it's 1 time, then X. If it's 2 times, then X. If it's right. So that's what he talked about from verses 7 through 10. That technique. Then he also talked about something which is a different type of subdivision. It's a non-zodiacal subdivision. It's just another way of dividing a sign into 5. There's 2 ways of dividing a sign into 5. There's 2 ways of dividing a sign into 5 divisions. The first way is called the bounds, and that is you take the 5 real planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and they have a certain order to them, which is Mars and Venus on the edges, Mercury and Saturn next, and then Jupiter in the middle, and you assign degrees to them. So that's why it's called Trimsha. Trimsha actually means 30, so you take the 30 degrees and you allot them to 5 planets. So but they don't get equal allotments. That's why it's called Bhamsha, which means boundaries, or it's why this is the only division which is not equal. Every division is not equal. So it's 5. Starting from Mars, going forward, it's 5, 5, 7, 8, 5. That is the degrees. That's one way of splitting the sign into 5 divisions. We'll cover a technique for that today. Another way of dividing signs into 5 divisions is to have just 6 degrees each. 6 times 5 is 30, right? So if you take a 30-degree sign and divide it into 5 segments, each one is 6. But this is not assigned to, like most subdivisions, each division represents a sign or a ruler. In the way of dividing a sign into 5 equal parts, it represents an age of the planet. So in the 10th text, we learned about what the age of the planet implies, or how you interpret the age of the planet. And then we moved on to saying whatever techniques we described, they're particularly important when you talk about the lord of the division. And that the lord of the division will be determined by the planet that rules the division of the ascendant. So if that sounds a little bit Greek, it's just like in a regular birth chart, the lord of the chart is the planet that rules the ascendant, right? So if the ascendant is at 23 degrees Capricorn, Saturn rules Capricorn, so Saturn rules the ascendant, so Saturn is called the ruler of the chart by virtue of being the ruler of the first house. Now, if that means that the ascendant is in Leo Navamsha, then that means that the ruler of Leo is the ruler of the Navamsha. Or if that means that it's in Saturn. It was hard to do in my head for some reason. Saturn, and then the first Earth, Saturn, Venus, Mercury. So that would mean that Mercury, being the ascendant, is now in Mercury's Treka, or third. So Mercury is the ruler of the thirds, the Treka. And the planet that rules the division is very, very important to the division. That's another point that Mantreshwar made. If you want to hear this explained in more length, go back to the recorded sessions and you can pretty easily find them. He also finally explained to us how you assess the Horus, since it's an unusual division that each division only belongs to the sun or the moon. So how do you assess if it's good or bad for a planet? He talked about the Drakons having certain character by rising. So if this Drakon rises, then it's good. If the next one rises, it's medium. If another one rises, it's not good. For Drakon-y things, which is like bravery and boldness. And now, this was... So we're up to text. I think in connection with the main chart, I think I should have wrote 16 here instead of 15. This was last week's session where he talked about techniques which will sew together different amshas. So for example, if a planet is in a certain navamsha, and then the lord of that navamsha is conjoined to it in the main chart, or trying to it in the main chart. That's the technique that he talked about there last week. All right, that's a review of what we learned so far. If your head is already spinning, that's okay. If you weren't present in any of these classes, you just go back and watch the recorded versions of them and take it slow. If your head is spinning and you were there, then that's also okay, because you probably are kind of not studying this on your off time. So just take opportunities when there's no other live stream, go back and review those so your head doesn't spin. Moderate spinning is unavoidable because there's so much information. Now let's move on to today's subject. So today's topic is the techniques that are for the thirds and the fifth, the Treka and the Bhamsha, or Trimsha. Okay, ready? Everything's good? Everything's good. Kuryat atma surit driganagashashi kalyana rupam gunam. So he says the moon, in her own or friend's Trekan, confers prosperity, beauty, and virtue. So Shashi, the moon. Do you know why the moon's called Shashi? Shashi means rabbit. Why is the moon called a rabbit? This is opportune because today is a full moon. If it's not too cloudy for you, when the moon is out, look at it. And if you interpret a certain way, then you'll see the dark spots on the moon look like a rabbit. There's two big ears coming off the head, and then the whole thing is sitting down. So the Indian culture saw not a man in the moon like a man's face, but they saw a rabbit there, so they call it Shashi. So if Shashi is in Atma or Surit Treka, if it's in the Treka, in its Atma own sign, or Surit, friend's sign, then it's Kalyana, which is prosperous, Rupa, which is beautiful, and Guna, which is virtuous or qualified, having a lot of quality. Okay, so this is a nice principle. He's specifying it for the moon, so therefore it's particularly relevant for the moon. Doesn't mean that it can't be used for other planets. It should be used for other planets. The moon in her own or friend's Drakan confers prosperity, beauty, and virtue. Simple. We'll look at the technique more so it sinks in. Shrey Angsyuttama Varga jas Tvaparagastan na tajatan gunan. This is two things wrapped into one sentence. If she has Uttama Varga, she confers excellence, and anywhere she confers the qualities of her Lord. So Uttama Varga, that refers back to where he was talking about counting the dignities, counting up or tallying up the amount of good dignity that a planet has in the whole set of 10 Vargas. There was Parijat Uttam. Uttama was 2. I do believe Uttama is 2. If it has 2 good Vargas. So what he's really saying is, if in the Trekan the moon is in a friend's sign or the own sign, which is, Trekan will actually only be with the ruler, so he's not even mentioning exaltation, right? Trekan is governed by planets, not by signs. So if in the Trekan it's with a friendly planet or itself, its own zone, and also, do you understand? Maybe I don't want to. I'm sorry if I'm confusing the speech. If its Trekan belongs to itself or a friendly planet, then it's good. So the moon will confer its qualities, like it will give Kalyana, Rupa, and Guna, qualities, good qualities, beauty, and prosperity. If it's also in a good base sign, like in the regular zodiac, then that's going to be Shreya. It's going to make the person have that stuff to an excellent or excelling degree. They'll excel others, demonstrably, noticeably excel in this regard. So they'll have just if a planet, or especially in the moon, is in its own Treka or in a friend's Treka, then it's going to confer its good qualities. In the moon's case, it's prosperity and quality, virtue, and beauty. If it's also good in the basic zodiac, then it's really, really good to an excessive amount, like not to an excelling amount, not excessive. So, for example, if the moon is in Cancer, first 10 degrees, then it will be in its own zodiac and also in its own third. So then it will have this condition of Uttama Varga with the Trekana. Level up. Thank you, Marie. And then he says, so up Aparagastan, no matter where it is, Nata Jatan Gunan, it will confer the qualities of the Lord that it's with. So this is also quite important. This is actually really important, and it's a little bit of a mind bender, and it takes a little while to digest this. But the planet gets influenced by the Lord so much so that it actually delivers the qualities of the Lord, especially in the case of the moon, which is very impressionable, or Mercury as well, especially in the case of the moon. So it's like the principle, if you hang around with certain people, you become like them. Or if you study from a certain person, then you learn that person's point of view. You become like that person. So the planet who's in another planet's sign actually represents the things that planet represents, that the Lord represents. So the moon especially will confer the qualities of the Lord that it's in. Like if it's in Saturn's Treka, then the moon will confer Saturn's qualities. If it's in Jupiter's Treka, then the moon will confer Jupiter's qualities. And also the Lord of the main sign as well. If the moon is in Gemini, then the moon confers Mercury's qualities. If the moon is in Libra, then the moon confers Venus' qualities. Make sense? So the moon in her own or a friend's Drakan confers prosperity, beauty, and virtue. If she has Uttama Varga, she confers excellence. Anywhere she confers the qualities of the Lord. So you have to put all these things together. I'll show you an example of it so that you'll see how it goes together. But what it's saying is, if the moon is in a good Drakan, then it gives its good qualities really well. Even more so if it's also in a good base zodiac, then it has Uttama Varga. And in all situations, you have to scope those good qualities in terms of the qualities of the Lord that the moon has. So, for example, if the moon is in Jupiter's Drakana and is friendly with Jupiter, right? So that would be, it's going to confer prosperity, beauty, and virtue in a Jupiterian scope. Those things will apply to Jupiterian aspects of life. Make sense? Now, the next line. That was all, so far that was all about Treka, and now he's going to give you a technique for Trimsha, which is the unequal division of 5 sections in a sign. Sva Trimshangshagata Graha Vidadate Tat Karakatoditam. A planet in its own Trimsha confers everything that it represents. So, say this with the right stress, and then it makes sense. Say it with the wrong stress, and it kind of doesn't seem to say anything. But what he's saying is, Saturn is supposed to represent working hard and being indefatigable and being strong, etc., and long-lived. Saturn is supposed to represent these things. If Saturn is in its own Trimsha, then it really, really does represent those things. So this basic, simple principle is, if a planet is in somebody else's zone, then it mixes with with the qualities of that Lord. Like he just said, anywhere you go, she confers the qualities of her Lord. So you get influenced by the other people. But if you're in your own spot, then you just get influenced by yourself. So you really, really become yourself. So what he's saying, if a planet is in its own place, then it really does represent exactly what the textbook says it represents. And it's especially true for the Trimsha. If a planet is in its own Trimsha, the bounds, if a planet is in its own boundary, then it really becomes the planet that you were taught it was when you read the astrology textbook. That's what this means. Swatrimshamsa gata graha, a planet that's got to its own trimshamsa. Then vidate tad karakatva oditam. You should know that it really is going to be the thing that it represents. What it's known for. It really will do what it's known for. That means that anywhere else, a planet is not really always going to be exactly the way it's described in the textbook, because it's got blends with so many other planets. And then the final line. Of course, if you guys have questions, you can go ahead and ask questions, about the subject. Tatraiko pi surid grahekshita yuta svochertha yuktam nripam. Kingship is conferred by even one planet in exaltation or domicile, while joined or aspected by a friendly planet. This is like another thing. So I would say there's maybe 3 techniques in this one text. The third one is this third principle. You'll get something called Nripa, which means kingship, which means you master people. Nripa. So in other words, you become excellent if you get a planet, even one. In other words, if there's more than one, it's really great. It really will come true. If it's just one, then it could even be. Even if it's just one, it might be that, if the rest of the chart is not antithetical to the person becoming great, then even just one planet that has this condition will make a person kingly, or the boss, or rise up. What's the condition? The condition is it should be in a good sign with good influence. And what does he specify as being a good sign? Your own sign or your exaltation sign. So if the moon is in Cancer or Taurus, if Mars is in Aries or Scorpio or Capricorn, then it's in a good sign, it's in its own sign, or it's in an exaltation sign. This is one of the basic things that's a part of many, many, many Vedic astrology yogas. This concept is a planet in a good sign, and the definition of it is exaltation or own or domicile. Sometimes it's extended to exaltation, domicile, or friend. If a planet is an exaltation or domicile and influenced by a friendly planet. And how would it be influenced? Either by yuti, which is conjunction, or iksha, which is to see, which is aspect. So kingship is conferred by even one planet in exaltation or domicile, while joined or aspected by a friendly planet. So you see this. Well, besides all the specific facts of what these guys are talking about and what the books are talking about, you really should be learning basic mechanics of how astrology works. The most basic mechanic to learn is that 2 and 3 is more powerful than 1. 2 and 3 on the same point gives more weight than 3 1s spread out all over the place. So it's good to be in your own sign. That's 1. It's good to have an influence from a friendly planet. That's 1. When you put those 2 things together on one spot, then that makes 2, which is much more powerful, twice as powerful as these 2 1s spread out. That's what most of the yogas are just illustrating, this basic mechanic of reading an astrology chart. And modern astrologers talk about this as confluence, where the things come together. I often think of it as like trying to open up a lock. When you open up a lock, you have 3 or 4 tumblers in there. They have to all get hit in a row. They have to all be pushed. Otherwise the lock doesn't open. Even if you push 1 or 2, it's not there. It's only when everything lines up the right way. So he's saying, like, if you have a planet in exaltation or domicile and aspected or joined a friendly planet, that's great. Yes, you follow along. Zena asks, so would the moon in, say, Pisces or Sagittarius, but if it's in the Dracan of a friendly planet, is this in a good condition? If it's in the Dracan of a friendly planet, it's good. If it's in Pisces or Sagittarius, it may also be in a friendly sign. So I might even have Uttama Varga and be very good. So like Robbie's just said, you probably want to check the temporary friendship and not just use the natural inherent friendship. Sorry, I got something stuck in my throat. But the only reason why I say probably, and that definitely is, he says here, a planet may be joined with a friend. How do you do that? Because no planet has great friendship, inherent great friendship. Great friendship is only achieved by circumstance. And so therefore, any planet that you can join with could at best be a neutral. So he may actually be just talking about inherent friendship, at least when it comes to this, when you're considering conjunctions. Oh my God. I don't know what just happened, but I got an itch in my throat. Are houses important for the analysis of Trimsha? How you construct houses for the Trimsha? The Trimsha is not composed of signs. The Trimsha is ruled by planets. The Trimsha and the Treka are not composed of signs. I think it's Trimsha, Treka, Shashyamsa, and Hora. Yeah, I think those are the ones that are not constituted by zodiac signs. So you can't construct another chart of them. Oftentimes, you will, an astrology program or software or an astrologer will anyway, just for the sake of writing it, especially when you come to computers, just for writing it in the same format or expressing it in the same format. But it's misleading. 16th is questionable. 16th does have signs in it, but it also has these other weird things to it. All right. I will now show you an example of how you analyze these things in a chart, because that's really how you learn the stuff. You have to try to use it. If you don't try to, whether it's astrology or anything, if you don't try to use what you learned, then it never becomes digested. It's like food that you buy but don't eat. If you just listen to something, then it's like buying food. If you try to use it, then it's like eating the food. So it's only really by trying to use something that it becomes part of you. So let's try to use it. Here's a chart that you may recognize because I use it sometimes. It's my chart. So let's just use that for this. First principle is if the moon is in her own or friend's Dracan, then it will confer prosperity, beauty, and virtue. So let's see where we got the moon. Moon is at 5 degrees of Gemini. So what Dracan is that? Dracans are very easy to deal with. It's just 10-degree segments. So 5 degrees is in the first segment, right? 1 to 10 is one, 10 to 20 is the next, and 20 to 30 is the third Dracan. So the moon is in the first Dracan of Gemini. What planet rules the first Dracan of Gemini? That's also very easy because the first Dracan of any sign is ruled by the ruler of the sign. Second is ruled by the first trine from it, ruler of the first trine, and the third is ruled by the next trine from it. So the first Dracan of Gemini is Mercury, so the moon's Dracan is Mercury. So here, when you you don't have to have another chart for the Dracan or anything. Just by knowing the degree of the planet, you can know what Dracan it's in. Moon is in 5 degrees of Gemini. That means its trachon is Mercury. Is the moon... So then the next question is the moon friendly to Mercury? Not is Mercury friendly to the moon. Mercury is passive. In this case, Mercury is passive. Mercury, the ruler is passive. The occupier is active. When you're assessing the dignity of a planet in a house, the host is somewhere else. The host is passive. The host just made the place. The guest, the occupant, the planet itself, is the active principle. So you want to know how the active principle feels about the host. You want to know how the guest feels about the host, to understand how the guest feels, to understand the guest's dignity. So we want to know, how does the moon feel about Mercury? If the moon is in her own or her friend's Treka. So how does she feel about Mercury? The moon's natural relationship to Mercury is friendship, because Mercury is her child. Mercury's natural relationship to the moon is not friendship. But moon's natural relationship to Mercury is friendship. So yes, there's natural friendship. And then if you want to also consider temporal friendship, you can go back and... we explained it in one of these streams about how to do this, but the distance of Mercury from the moon is 3 signs, which improves the friendship. 2, 3, or 4 improves the friendship. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 decrease it. 10, 11, and 12 improve it again. Okay, so this would match the condition of the moon being in her own or a friend's trachon. And so it should confer prosperity, beauty, and virtue. The next thing is, if she has Uttama Varga, she confers excellence, which we explained means it will make these things, it will give the prosperity, beauty, and virtue not just to a 50-cent degree, but to a $50 degree, or at least to a dollar degree, not just halfway or not just a little bit, but a lot. If she has Uttama Varga. So let's see if it's Uttama Varga. Uttama Varga means same division twice, or a good division twice. So we just determined that the Trachon belongs to Mercury. Mercury is a great friend. So the moon's Trachon in this chart is good. It's in a good Varga. We just determined that. Now the Rashi is Gemini. So that's easy. That's going to be the same thing, because Gemini belongs to Mercury. You don't have to do any other work. So you know that the Rashi also is a great place for the moon, because the moon is her host is her great friend. So this does match Uttama Varga. The moon here in Gemini has Uttama Varga with the Treka. So it's going to be, to a big degree, it's going to confer prosperity, beauty, and virtue. Is it making sense? Is it looking clear? Third principle, anywhere or wherever it is, it will confer the qualities of her Lord. So how do you interpret this? The Lord is Mercury, right? So since the Lord is Mercury, then it means that the prosperity, beauty, and virtue is in relation to Mercury. It's in the scope of Mercury. So the excellent prosperity, beauty, and virtue will relate to mercurial qualities. So that means this moon is showing that the person is good with Mercury, which means intelligence, or it means words, language, or it means numbers, math, symbols, or it means astrology, or it means communication, or anything that Mercury represents. Detail, organization. So, you get it? If the moon was in a different kind of Dracon, then it would relate to something else. Like if it was in Jupiter's Dracon, then it would relate to more morals, morality, charity, generosity, stuff like that. The Trimsha chart in my report is written in the conventional way that astrologers usually write it, because you just stick it on a chart. Just take the ruler of whatever sign the planet is in a chart of a Trimsha, and you know that that's the ruler of the planet's Trimsha. I don't understand your question, Elf. Moon is exalted in Taurus. So in Libra, is she better than in Cancer? No. I get it. Since it's the same Lord. No. All right, understand this so far? Makes sense? So this really, though, it should open your eyes that this is why it's not easy. Like somebody says, guess my rising sign. Or it's just a guess. It's really just a guess. It's a guess because things can be delivered by other things. UPS can deliver your package from flowers.com, or UPS can deliver your package from wrenches.com. But it's UPS. The postman can deliver you a letter from your friend, or can deliver you a letter from the IRS, or can deliver you a subpoena to a court. And it's just the postman. It's in the same way a planet, especially the moon, can deliver the effects of many other planets, depending on what lords it's influenced by, and what aspects it's influenced by, and what conjunctions it's influenced by. So when you look at a person and you think, God, this person is so Mercury, and you look at your chart and you say, where's their Mercury? I don't get it. This is part of the reason why. I'm not saying that always happens. Sometimes it's obvious. Mercury is the only planet in the Kendras, or Mercury is exactly aligned with the ascendant. In this case, Mercury is exactly aligned with the ascendant as well, the ascendant degree. Mercury is 25 degrees, the ascendant degree is 25 degrees. But here's another way that would escape your. It's not obvious, or it's right on the page itself. It's underneath the page that the moon is in Gemini, and Mercury's Treka. So the moon, whatever stuff is ascribed to the moon, is really going to result in good things relating to Mercury. All right, now here's another. This is now for the Trimsha. He said that a planet in its own Trimsha confers everything that it represents. And we talked about that, right? Talked about what that means. So let's find an example in this chart. Look at Saturn. The Saturn is at 21 degrees of Taurus. So let's work that out. Let's figure out what Trimsha that's in. So Taurus is female. The Trimshas go in a certain order. The degrees, the order is Mars. The easiest way to do Trimshas, like I said before, is Mars and Venus on the edges. Saturn, Mercury. You get male, female on the edges, then you get the third genders in the middle, and then you get next to them, and then you get Mercury in the middle. So you got Mars, Venus, Saturn, and you have to start with malefics and end with benefics. Mars, Venus, Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter in the middle. That's your Trimshamsa lordship. But if it's a female sign, it's this. It will flip. And then it's 5 degrees, 5 degrees, 7 degrees, 5 degrees, 5 degrees, 8 degrees, 7 degrees, 5 degrees. 5, 5, 8, 7, 5. But if it's female sign, it will be 5, 7, 8, 5, 5. That's how Trimsha works. So let's figure it out for this Saturn. Taurus is a female sign, so the order will be this, right? So the order will be 0 to 5 is Venus. The next 7 degrees, 5 to 12 is Mercury. Then 8 degrees, 12 to 20 is Jupiter. Then 5 degrees, 20 to 25 is Saturn. Then the last 5 is Mars, 25 to 30. So which one is Saturn? Is Saturn? It's at 21 degrees, so it's in between 20 and 25. So it's in Saturn's Trimsha. So a planet in its own Trimsha, that's Saturn. Saturn here is in its own Trimshamsa. And so what does he say about this? This planet really is the planet that you think it is. This planet really is the planet that your teacher told you it was. This planet really is the way that it was described in Linda Goodman's simple astrology textbook. You know, the basic astrology textbooks that just describe you the basic, plain vanilla version of the planet. This planet really is itself because it's influencing itself. Yes, Zena, we definitely should apply. I mentioned that. Okay. So what does that mean? What is some of the things that Saturn represents? Well, you could say Saturn is dirty, or Saturn is handicapped, etc. When a planet is in its own sign, it is going to own sign or is influenced by itself, then it's going to function well. It has good dignity. So even if you're talking about a malefic, don't think that it means this is the bad version of this planet, the bad things that this planet can do. If a planet is in good dignity, it doesn't do bad things. It does good things, good versions of the things that it does. If it's in bad dignity, it does bad versions of the things that it does. Make sure you get that ironed out first. That's why Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 are about what these things are, and Chapter 3 and onward is about how to use them. Don't skip the 1 and 2. Knowing what the planets are, knowing the clearly so that you know this is what the planet really is. This is a bad version of it. This is a good version of it. Don't forget, I actually offer those courses on my website so you can learn it straight and easy and not have to figure it out for yourself like I had to do. All right, for Saturn at 21 degrees, it's in its own Trimsha. So that should confer everything it represents. So what does that mean? Longevity, tenacity, not giving up. Dirtiness. What would dirtiness mean in a good way? Not afraid to get dirty, not afraid to get your hands dirty, not afraid to get down to business, not afraid to get to work. What else does Saturn represent? Like the masses. So it's not really... Oh, so a good Saturn means like underdog, or known by the people but not recognized by the authorities or something. Okay. Here, look also at Mercury. Mercury is another example of this. Mercury at 25 degrees of Leo. Let's see if you can figure out that Trimsha. Leo is a male sign, so it's going to go forward. So we're going to flip the order. It's going to, if you look up to the notes that are about Saturn, you see this is the opposite order. The Trimsha goes, in a male sign, it goes in this order. Mars for the first 5 degrees, Saturn the next 5, Jupiter for the third, Mercury, and then ends with Venus. We're at 25 degrees. Mercury's at 25 degrees. So where is that? 18 to 25 belongs to Mercury, and 25 to 30 belongs to Venus. So which Trimsha is Mercury in? In this case, you want to look at minutes. At least because the way that this chart is drawn is just rounded the minutes to degrees. So you don't know if it's 24 degrees and 31 minutes, or if it's 21, or I'm sorry, what? You don't know if it's 24 degrees, 31 minutes, or if it's 25 degrees, 29 minutes. It would both round to 25. So let's just look at what the actual minutes are. The actual minutes are 24 degrees and 53 minutes. So it's actually less than 25 degrees. So it's in the Mercury Trimsha. So in this chart, Saturn has this condition and Mercury have the condition of being in their own Trimsha. And the result of being in your own Trimsha, in your own bounds, is that you can really be yourself. So Mercury really represents Mercury in this chart. Mercury is really about intelligence. Mercury is really about organization. Mercury is really about language skill. Mercury is really about symbolism and interchange and translation. Saturn is really about tenacity, long life, endurance, work ethic. None of the other planets are in their own Trimsha. Make sense? Enemy Bash asks if I believe enemy dignity gives bad results. Enemy dignity, what is there not to believe? That's the basic astrological theory. Bad dignity, bad result. Good dignity, good result. It doesn't matter if it's Uttama Varga, it doesn't matter if it's Moon or any other planet, it doesn't matter if it's in D1 or any other Amsha. D60, by the way, go back and watch the live streams that were about the D60. At least as far as Montreshwar was concerned, there is no dignity in D60. There's just auspicious and inauspicious 60ths. Alrighty. There's one more point that was made. He said, kingship is conferred by even one planet in exaltation or domicile, while joined or aspected by a friendly planet. So let's find an example of this so you can see what he actually means. Can you find a planet in this chart that is either in domicile, which means its own sign? Domicile means in its own home. Or exaltation. There's not many. So there's in fact only one. There's no exalted planet in this whole chart. And there's only one planet that's in its own sign. If you take a second, you can find it. It's just the sun. So the only planet that could possibly illustrate this principle in this chart is the sun. In order to illustrate this principle, it has to meet two requirements. It has to not only be in domicile or exaltation, but it also has to be influenced by a friendly planet. So, this influence can occur by an aspect or by a conjunction. So just look at where the sun is. It's not in a position where it's going to get a lot of aspects from people, from other planets. Because the whole chart is, the planets are like on one section and the sun is kind of in the middle of that section. So most aspects come from across. And if you check, Saturn is actually giving it a bit of an aspect, but Saturn is not a friendly planet to the sun. Because Saturn has a strong aspect at that 60 degree mark, and it's about 70 degrees away from the sun, or sun is 70 degrees away from it. Jupiter, it's at the end of the 10th house, so it's going to give a strong aspect to the end of the 6th house, but the sun is all the way at the beginning of the 8th house, so it's a little bit in Jupiter's aspect, probably 70% of Jupiter's aspect, but it's not really at a key point in Jupiter's aspect. So the sun's not really going to match this criteria of getting aspect from a friendly planet. However, conjunction, it's very, very conjoined with Mars. It's only 2 degrees away from Mars. And Mars is a friendly planet with the sun. So the sun will be able to confer kingship, give excellence. And how you'll interpret that, well, basically, regardless of whatever house it is, if the sun is the planet that has this yoga to it, then the nature of the sun becomes excellent in the person. Confidence, clarity, leadership skill. And then if you want, you could say, well, it's in the 8th house, so it'll have that flavor and nature to it. Okay, so hopefully that was illustrated for you well enough so that you actually understand the principles that he brought up. The first principle is, if the moon, or any planet really, but especially the moon, is in its own Treka, it's great. If it's also in a good basic sign, then it's even more great. And that greatness is always going to express itself in the context of the Lord, especially of the Treka. Those are the first three that are in the yellow background. And then with the blue background, there's two other principles. If a planet's in its own Trimsha, in its own boundary, then it really becomes very strongly that planet. It really acts like itself and resists other influence in a good way. And then the final principle was a planet that's in its own sign or exaltation and associated with good planets really, really shines and gives excellence. And that was illustrated by the sun. Okay? That's today's batch of techniques from the Phaladipika. Let's see what you guys are saying here. Bardo, if the fact that planet is in its own Trimsha affects the planet's dignity, wouldn't it be easier to just skip Trimshamsa step and analyze direct effects of the planet's position in the Rasis? No, I don't see why. If a planet is in its own Trimshamsa, the author, Montresor, is telling you, if the planet's in its own Trimshamsa, then it's setting its own boundaries. The Trimshamsa is setting your boundaries. That's why it's called the bounds. It's setting its own boundaries. If you set your own boundaries, then you act like yourself. The planet that is in its own Trimshamsa really gets to act like itself. That's the principle. I don't know why you would want to skip that or replace that with something else. Samurai. I understood that Mercury was in the middle between Jupiter and Saturn, but here in the graph is besides Venus. What's she talking about? Here in the graph was besides Venus? I understand that Mercury was in the middle between Jupiter and Saturn. I don't know what you're talking about. The order of the Trimshamsas? This is the correct order. The way it's described on the screen right now. Bruh. Somebody said bruh. Hollywood Davis. What about K2 and Sagittarius? The techniques don't really apply for K2. How can K2 be in its own boundary? How can K2 be in its own Trimsha? It doesn't have a balance. It doesn't have a Trimsha. Did we discuss placements where Draken and Trimsha lords are the same? No, but it's the basic principle will then be... Yeah, that's a very good question because it clarifies what is meant by Vargottama or Uttama Varga. Vargottama is where the Varga and is the same as the base sign. That's probably what it means by Uttama Varga also. Not Uttama Amsha, but Uttama Varga. Just a simpler. It's the same. It boils down to the same thing as what I explained already. But it would be a simpler explanation to translate this as if she has Vargottama, she confers excellence. So anyway, if a planet has the same Trimsha and Treka Lord, he hasn't said anything about that. I would tell you that now that planet is that Lord is now twice the Lord. So say for example my moon, it's got Mercury, it's in Gemini, so Mercury is its Lord, and it's also in Gemini's Trimsha. It's also in Mercury's Trimsha. I'm sorry, it's also in Mercury's Treka. So it's Mercury's twice its Lord. So you can think of it that way. Whether if a planet is in Cancer Navamsha and Cancer Dashamsa, then the moon has become that planet's Lord twice. So you can evaluate the actual lordship amounts in that way. But the concept of Vargottama is not in relation between Amshas, but from the Amsha to the main sign. So if the Amsha sign is the same as the main sign, then it lights up and becomes good, even if it's not otherwise a good dignity. Okay. But this does show also now that he's saying Uttama Varga for the Treka. That shows that Uttama Amsha is not just for Navamsha. Sorry if that's making some head spin. So yes, Zina, it does double down on being negative if it's not friendly. So I'm only answering things that appear to be questions and also that I kind of understand. So I9 Bash, Ketu and Barney on the same degree as Mercury. That doesn't relate to anything that we talked about. Zena, so if the moon, for example, was in Mars, Treka, and Trimsha, or Sun and Moon, Treka, and Trimsha, would that be like moon trying to act like Mars or Sun trying to act like moon? Yes. This stuff makes surely good, guys. All right, guys. You survived another live stream. So thank you so much. I'll see you in 2 days for the next installment of Bhagavatam.